So if you do not want to stay here and I missed your message in chat, just tell me where to send you, or stick your thumbs up if you're planning on sticking and talking about games. All right. Awesome. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Caro. I'm tech support, but also an author. Nihal is one of my doctoral candidate. She's my doctoral candidate. And she is my backup. And so if a bunch of people come in and suddenly need to be brought in for whatever reason, or, whatever, then she's going to take over because she knows as much as I do about this stuff. So I would love to start with you all just doing like a quick brief introduction. Like, I'm Caro Williams-Pierce. I'm a faculty member at the University of Maryland College Park in the iSchool there. And I really love mathematical play and all the things that occur around it, particularly in video games. So let's go in my version of a circle, which means it starts with you, Dr. Infinity.
I am Nicole Infante. I am math faculty at West Virginia University. It was my first year seminar students last year who confused Infante and Infinity, and hence I am now Dr. Infinity. I am very interested in just how we use our bodies to learn math. And I want to talk about playful and how we might do that in higher levels of math. Because I think that's important in a place where we might not be doing something that could be valuable.
Awesome, thank you. Hannah, you're next on my little loop.
Hi, I'm Hannah Smith. I'm a third-year graduate student at WPI in the Learning Sciences program. I'm interested in using games for learning with both preschoolers and higher level middle schoolers. And currently we're working on a project that integrates active learning but has a technology component. So I'm interested in how embodiment works into that, and the aspects of technology that are important and the aspects of the physical environment that are important.
Awesome, thank you. Nihal?
You already introduced me. I'm a PhD candidate in University of Maryland. So this is my third year. So I tried to work on my proposal this year, like in embedded cognition mathematics video games. So that's it. I'm also international student. I'm from Turkey.
And Nihal's focusing on graspable math, which is actually a really good room for all of you to go wander into after this, because Aaron is one of the creators of graspable math. So yeah. All right, awesome, thanks. Ohun?
I'm Ohun Kwan. I'm a lecturer in math department from UW-Madison. And I'm also a member of research group in Mitch's research. And I'm interested in both math and games. So that's why I'm here.
Awesome. We got more of the undergraduate math folks here. It's not just you, Nicole. Marcus, hi.
Hi, my name is Marcus Wolf. I'm a visiting professor at JMU and still a doctoral student at Morgan State. And my research interest is the idea of like creating games inside of games to learn mathematical content.
That's awesome. Marcus is playing with the edge between constructivist and constructionist. So if you really want to get him going, just ask him questions about that line. All right, Francis, you're up.
Customer along
Hi, can you hear me?
They get impacted by both ends.
Yes.
So, just some things like
all right, so there's multiple meetings going on here right now, so I apologize for that.
That's totally fine. Okay, just talk loudly and drown them.
All right, yeah, so I'm Francis, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. I actually work with Hannah Smith on the Wearable Learning Cloud platform. A lot of my work centers on computing education, and right now with my postdoctoral work, I'm working on games for learning in computing and mathematics.
Way to be an overachiever. Yeah, that sounds awesome. Okay, and Maria, you're next.
Hi, I'm Mariam. I'm working in France as a lecturer, I'm a background in psychology, so I'm interested in teacher training, and I'm interested in technology embodiment in general, not in math in specific. But I think that it's interesting, the discussion, and especially for teacher also. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. Paul?
Hi, my name is Paul Reimer. I'm a doctoral candidate at Michigan State, and I'm also I'm also the director of a small nonprofit math and science education center in California. And I'm interested in play as an embodied approach to learning, particularly in early childhood, as well as in teacher education and professional development.
Awesome. Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Matt?
Hi, I'm Matt Montel. I'm a fourth year grad student at Florida State University. I'm currently working on a project that uses video games to teach some of the starting principles behind linear algebra. And so I'm interested in gaming and higher level mathematics.
It's awesome. We really do have a nice undergraduate contingent here. This is awesome. Okay, so I have some open-ended questions that Nihal and I threw into the reading questions document, but those are just there to get us started if we need it. But I suspect that some of you have questions that you could start us off with that might be more relevant to this group. So I'm going to do the awkward waiting time on Zoom. It's worse on Zoom than in person. So unmute yourself and ask me a question, or ask us a question. Okay, open-ended question it is. Oh yeah.
I actually, so can you introduce a little bit more about your game, like Raleigh's Adventure that you mentioned in the paper?
Yeah.
So what was that about, and what math concepts do you want to deal with that
Yeah.
game?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Raleigh's Adventure was a game that I built for my dissertation. And the goal of it was to essentially create a proof of concept that said that we do not need to prioritize content learning over game principles, or we do not need to prioritize game principles over content learning, but rather that we can find this space in the middle. And it certainly did. I'm satisfied with it as a proof of concept. I will say that if you are a doctoral student thinking about designing and building your own game that follows that tries to be in the middle, I don't recommend it, because you have to be an expert in multiple areas, which just means you have extra work, and the design process and the building process can be messy. So, I mean, I have a good job now, so obviously it got me somewhere, but it did mean that I was a doctoral student for probably a year longer than I otherwise would have been if I had just used a pre-existing product. So I decided to focus on fractions for a number of reasons. One of them is that, there's a lot of research out there that's just like, you know what, undergraduates also suck at fractions. Adults kind of suck at fractions. They don't suck at fractions if you situate it in a meaningful context, though. People can be very creative, but if you're like, you know what, use paper and pencil, and then add 1/2 to 1/4, and you'll get a bunch of really weird answers. So I was like, okay, so it seems like fractions is we know that it's a difficult area in the younger grades, but we also know, but have explored less, how difficult it is for all of the other, for the rest of life beyond the introduction. So I decided to do middle school students in fractions. And the middle school students, they're already supposed to know fractions, but plenty of them don't. And so I just thought that would be an interesting group to work with. So I had to, I dug into fractions learning literature, like the best way to support people in learning fractions, how they might move through different fraction schemes. So like Steffi and Olive, Hackenberg, I don't know, a wide variety of folks. And so I had this all right, so here's a potential hypothetical learning trajectory that I could design for. Now, let me go read a bunch of game scholar stuff. And I primarily used crap, Zimmerman and some Shell was one. Zimmerman and somebody was another one. These are famous. Marcus, do you know who I'm talking about? Is it?
I mean, there's D, which you haven't mentioned yet.
Oh yeah, G. Oh yeah, and then G for short.
Yeah.
But there's this. It's one of those like design Bibles. Zimmerman, maybe somebody and Zimmerman.
Can't remember.
Yeah,
Tekinbash? Tekinbash, you mean?
Who?
Tekinbash. Tekinbash?
All right, you could type it. Type it. Okay, well, anyway, all of these things are in my dissertation, so I'm happy to share that with you. But anyway, so I looked at all this game scholarship stuff and all the different like ways to support. Oh, that's right. But that's her married name. That's her Turkish married name, which is why I was like, what are you saying? Got it. Okay. But she was somebody else beforehand, and that's who she co-authored the Zimmerman piece with. All right. So Salen and Zimmerman. Thank you, Nihal. Okay, that took way too long. So anyway, and I looked at G, who focuses on games and learning in particular, which is something that Shell and Salen and Zimmerman didn't specifically emphasize. And I was like, all right, so I've got a little bit of I've got some like learning here. Let's like learning through games in a powerful situated fashion. Learning fractions is another thing. Let's try to fit this together. So I now have a framework for mathematical play. I have some principles for design that you should use if you're building a video game for mathematical play. Those principles are not set in stone. I'm still nuancing those. And in fact, Graspable Math is one of the games that breaks my principles for design. So I have to adjust it. One of the not unexpected things, so I come from a radical constructivist perspective, so I know that you are constantly learning from learners when you design context or when you observe people learning. But despite that, one of the hilarious emergent things that came up was that even though I designed my game for this like learning trajectory of fractions, people actually were focusing more on proportional reasoning and ratios. Some did some fraction stuff. But they were creating their own way of understanding the quantitative representations that I used for multiplication of fractions in the game. And they developed their own idiosyncratic ways of solving each puzzle. I don't actually think of this as a problem. I think it means that if I want to redesign it and be like, no, I will not let anyone think proportionally, like I refuse, then I need to like redesign some of those puzzles. But I think that being creative about proportional or ratio reasoning in any context is probably going to help ground people's fraction knowledge more, even in other contexts. Like I don't think of those as being separate content. Well, I mean, obviously they're all really connected, but so I was perfectly happy with that. But you know, I have some results on the like content-based learning, but really it was like, you know what, these players enjoyed playing this game even after I introduced math notation. That's not necessarily something like, you know, I think we can probably all imagine like a group of kids playing like Call of Duty, and they're holding their, well, okay, maybe not Call of Duty, but something, they're holding their controllers and they go, ah, and like that happens in Rolly's Adventure. How often does that happen in a regular math class? I haven't seen that. Even though I've always loved math, but I'm less likely to be with a group of people who love math as much as I do and go, ah. So yeah, so that's pretty much it. It's a console game though through Little Big Planet, so it's hard to get into classrooms. That's my basic summary, but it's just like, let's play and let's see how the process of learning occurs within these absurdly playful mathematical contexts. That was long-winded, but yeah. But that was my game. Yeah. And that's why like the co-speech gestures became super crucial with Rolly's Adventure, is because when you have these weird multimodal contexts that have unlabeled quantities and unlabeled like when I say unlabeled, what I mean is that the context itself is not providing a label to say this is a button, this is a fraction, this is a unit, this is a whatever. Like the player has to create those. And so often they'll just use words like they or them, and their gestures are what will tell you which unlabeled structure within the game they're referring to. And if I didn't analyze a gesture along with speech in the results of while people are playing Rolly's Adventure or in the post-tests, then yeah, their language would just be nonsense, and it would look like they were doing very little that was mathematical. Any follow-up questions about that?
So thank you for your introduction of that game. And I was wondering, so which part of your game you assume it's related to embodiment in some sense? I mean, what you have said is like after kids playing game, they explain how they played or how they learn mathematics using gestures and other things, right? So it's like after playing game, right? So what about before or like during the game? Did you assume some other things related to embodiment in some sense? Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Okay. Well, so first of all, if you want to see like super overtly embodied gameplay stuff, then that's definitely like go to Candace's room, because she talks about the connect stuff and the collaborative gesture and all of that. So that's like super awesome. Okay, so there's a couple different things. One is that I do occasionally dabble in the sort of like more hardcore embodied cognition side of things. So if we're going to talk about like doors, proportion, hands, or the connect stuff with Candace and Mitch, I think of that as like the hardcore embodied cognition perspective. And like you design context that specifically evoke certain movements, whether they're gestures or actions, that will implicitly support certain types of mathematical understanding. In this case, because it was a console game on the PlayStation and there was a controller, I wouldn't at all be surprised if there was some sort of small relationship between pushing the buttons, causing certain types of digital gestures, those digital actions. Those digital actions by the avatar may in some way support certain types of embodied learning. But I did not analyze that angle at all. Instead, I went to the lighter weight side, like Martha's side, or even actually like Hortensia with her teacher stuff is like sense, which is like we are naturally as human beings embodied. And therefore, when we communicate, one of the issues with sort of traditional mathematics education is that we prioritize spoken and written mathematics. And that is a problem for a whole host of reasons, I believe. And then now we're getting into technology that is pushing the boundaries of that in all sorts of abrupt ways. So not just like the console, there's an avatar on the screen jumping up and down, but also like swiping on a touchpad or something like that. Like these are all pushing like action and gesture and mathematical embodiment in productive ways. But I just looked at the like more, like I said, like Martha side of things, which is just, if we know, and we do know, that gesture can contain unique mathematical information about the gesturer's, oh, sorry, Emmanuel, I just saw your message. Sorry, I'm moving Emmanuel to a room. So we know that, I can't multitask that much. 2 seconds, everybody. Room 1. There we go, sweet.
So
right.
You can make me host and I can try them to send.
You're I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna make you the host.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you from it. I totally just forgot about that. So it should work. Sweet. All right. Okay, what was I talking? Right. We are embodied beings. When we communicate with gesture and with language and a bunch of other things. But let's just say those are two of the biggest things that happen when I'm spontaneously communicating with somebody. And we know that mathematical information about mathematical learning can be contained in the speech. The same information that's contained in speech can be contained in gesture or completely unique information. Therefore, if in general, as mathematics educators, if we don't attend to gesture, we are missing information about mathematical learning processes. So I think of that as like the light version of embodied cognition. I don't think it's light. I think it's absolutely transformative, but compared to some of the work other people in this group do, it is a bit light. So people like the gestures during my like pre-semi-structured interview were not super exciting. It was a paper and pencil, sort of one rich task at a time sort of thing. The gestures when they were explaining what was happening, because I asked them to do a talk aloud during the gameplay, the gestures they used then were incredibly rich and productive. And my transcript includes tons of references to different gestures because otherwise their language is not rich and not productive, that you need to consider those gestures. So those gestures were tied into communicating about their own learning process during the gameplay. And then in the post-test, there were echoes. And so they would use words paired with gestures that told me which game structures they were sort of like imagining or simulating in their head as they were talking. So that's kind of a long-winded story to say like, yeah, I wasn't like, make this shape or this shape and consequently you will learn more about triangles. I did not do a version of that. But my actual, like the findings would have been, I don't know, absolutely trivial, I think. Like I would have been able to say like, I have this really cool game. I built this, but I wouldn't be able to say anything interesting about learning. About specifically the process of learning. Nihal, will you close the breakout rooms and then give me host back? Folks, that was 25 minutes. And I think, and I'm sorry that like the first 5 minutes of that was me putting people in rooms. Yeah. Nihal, sorry. You want to ask an open-ended question for the math play folks?
Sure. And Arlis, what are your experiences with gesture and what video games? If you have, could you share with us? Like in the first question. Now, like it shouldn't need to be in math video games. Maybe other video games also count. We can count.
So one small experience I did, not just playing a game, but watching people play a game, is this game that I'm working with that does linear algebra. I went to another conference where they had people from elementary school, first or second graders, through college professors, and seeing some of the like second graders come in and play a linear algebra game and being able to ace the game quickly, and then watching other people come in and really, really struggle with the game in some ways, I thought was a very, very interesting experience. I also think it's really interesting, just like while playing the game kind of like tries to structure, gives you an idea of what space feels like in some way. And I have yet to be able to appropriately describe what it's like to be situated in the game. It's kind of interesting. I was wondering if anybody else has any experiences where they played a video game where they find it really hard to describe what it's like to be in the context of the game. You know that there's something there, but it's hard to communicate kind of what's there, which I guess is the whole point of gestures and everything else. But
yeah, so when you are working, are they just playing the game, or they are also like in Caro's writing? Are they talking with others or with someone else, like co-speech gestures, or they just play action gestures they show?
a lot of times these have been like kind of individuals. So they've been playing the game and I've been kind of sitting there asking them what they're thinking while they're playing the game.
So in which platform they are playing? Also like PlayStation or computer or also touch screen gestures?
It was on a computer game and it was kind of
Okay.
a drag and drop game with a mouse and a scaling with arrows. So
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Do you think, I guess I'm curious to know, is like, is there something about the drag and drop nature that kind of reinforced that for you to make it feel like space? Like if the drag and drop was maybe, I guess, a little bit more rougher or slower, like would that have made you not feel like it felt like space anymore, or at least for the students?
I actually am not so sure if it's the drag and drop as much as it is a couple of arrows which kind of scale length and give kind of a stretching feel to what's going on in different directions. And so I think that was a really nice decision. The drag and drop I think is nice, but I haven't seen as many. Mainly I think also maybe because I haven't been using touch screens. So students have been physically dragging it with the mouse, which I think is a little bit of a different action.
Anyone else want to share? Okay. Our other open-ended question is, how might play for mathematical experiences connect to productive mathematical learning? What do you think about this question?
So I think one of the things that stands out as in Caro's paper is the conversation about how that the gestures the students offered that weren't originally incited for, it would be interesting to figure out if those are gestures that are being initially constructed by the student, those are end up being kind of metaphors about the content gestured by the student, and therefore if we can unpack that, their understanding of whatever that content is different. Because comparing that to some of the other papers that we've described, compared that to some of the other papers, there's a difference in trying to design for a gesture rather than seeing a different gesture. And I guess I'm thinking, what does that say about what type of different mathematical metaphors are students applying to concepts that we aren't aware of? And maybe there's a better way for us to think about student learning of those topics for metaphors that they think may be more useful than the ones that we are kind of drawn to.
Okay, I have a couple folks who are left, particularly Christina, what room do you want to go to? And then Crines, what room do you want to go to? And then everybody else, I think I've placed you into a room if I found it. Yeah, so keep messaging me to keep messaging in the thing if you want to get put someplace that you haven't been put yet. Thank you, and sorry to interrupt. Okay, so I know Marcus just said something brilliant because Crines, this is the mathematical playroom. The other rooms depend upon the various authors of the different sections. So I guess just pick a topic, or I can randomly put you in one. They're all going to be awesome. Okay, I know Marcus said something brilliant, but what did you say, Marcus? Will you say it again or in another way so I can follow?
So what I was saying is that part of the potential in using video games and paying attention to the gestures that students construct, as you highlight, is like they offered the gestures, they offered a way of looking at things, and therefore maybe there's something to say about student-generated gesture as a way to unpack what it means to learn that topic, different than how I guess some of the other examples we've dealt with, where it's like we have a metaphor, we already have a metaphor that we think helps with the topic. Maybe we can change how we see the topic based on what students think are appropriate metaphors, and kind of reverse engineering rather than going forward with it. It's like a backwards design almost to say.
Yeah, I think that's delightful. And I also think like I don't actually know what the okay, so I think of voluntary use of mathematical language as being something that is key. Um, it is evidence of a perspective of mathematics as this like concise, precise, useful tool. And I think with gestures, there's probably something there too. It's just something I haven't explored fully, which is like spontaneous gesture use in these mathematical contexts. Maybe evidence that there is some rich learning going on that we are not yet able to see. And I'm not talking just about like the content of the communication, but rather, well, I'll bet Martha would know the answer to this, but rather, all right, this cat's wandering around yelling at me. Hi, everybody, this is Grimulkin. That when people are provoked to gesture, it is evidence that there is particularly productive or learning happening or complicated learning or other things like that. And again, I'm sure Martha would know the answer to this, but it's a bit beyond my area of expertise. Yeah. Neil, thanks for getting us through most of that, hopefully. All right.
So this is just my experience, or actually my son's experience. Recently my son is playing a lot of video games with their friends because it's like quarantine. You stay home, and all of your classes like virtual class. So my son is actually playing a lot of games with friends. But one thing I was really interested in is like when he make gestures. It's not like communicating with game. It's more like communicating with their friends who play the same game or things like that. So one tool was like the Discord. Have you ever heard that like messaging thing? Discord, they can speak to each other and they can text each other, but I was not sure about like watching their screen, like just like this Zoom meeting. Can you like I was not actually sure if he can communicate with friends with this cam through Discord. But so most of the communicating tool like Discord, they just support the voice and text, not the gesture communication. And it was really uh, uh, interesting, I think. I mean, like in terms of Caro's game, I mean, it seems like you're focusing on uh, players' communication through gestures when they play games, right? It's not about like communication between game and player. It's more about players and players, right?
So I would say I think that it could go that way, but it's not. But okay, wait. So I want to say first of
So
all, in Discord you can actually do video and you
mhm,
can do live streaming video.
mhm,
It's less awesome than
mhm.
Zoom, like
I
believe
see.
it or
Yeah.
not. But it's like I actually I'm using Discord in my class this year, and
Oh,
that's where I run my office hours.
I see.
And so it does afford that, but um so they're like one of the difficult things about Zoom actually, especially when people don't have cameras or can't have them on for some reason,
Mhm,
is like we are absolutely missing this modality that they're still spontaneously providing.
mhm,
And so we actually have to infer a lot more information as if we're on the phone, but we can see their face, which means that we should be able to see their gestures, but we can't.
mhm,
And the National Geographic wrote a really interesting piece about Zoom exhaustion towards the beginning of the pandemic that really
mhm,
ties like right into that. Like we visually see like we should have a certain type of modality of gesture and body language and eye contact and etc. But those are all either fake or different, and so we are
mhm,
exhausted in different ways. Okay, but to get back to the play component, like there is a lot of so if I'm imagining your kid sitting and playing a game, just doing verbal talking, then there's certainly like depending on the game that they're playing, most games will have some way, especially if you're on the same team, of communicating crucial visual information, such as where the other player's avatar is in relationship to yours, maybe on a map or something like that. So there's these sort of like other ways of indicating information that we might say, like in olden days, would be done this way. And a lot of those will also have gesture things. Like anyone who's played the Portal 2 collaborative thing is like, the gestures there were excellent. You could have your avatar say, go that way or wave or whatever. So you didn't need that, like the face-to-face, because you have the sort of digital component of it. But with my game, you know, I only tested Rolly's Adventure, I only collected data for Rolly's Adventure in a lab setting. And I had individuals or pairs there. And so for the most part, they were communicating to me for the talk aloud. But I was trying not to be intrusive. And there's a really interesting paper that's in process right now by Tony Pellicone, who's here at UMD. And he's writing this excellent paper that's about like essentially how you can cue students to do like, instead of bringing someone into a lab and being like, do a talk aloud, or asking them intrusive questions that breaks them out of the game immersion, you can say, you know, like, imagine that you are live streaming this on YouTube or Twitch, because that's its own cultural practice now that youth have experience with, either doing themselves or seeing themselves or etc. It's just like, it's just part of the thing. So it's this sort of like authentic cultural practice. And those live streaming often will include the same little like video box of the player. So it may very well include gestures, depending on how they have it set up and whether or not that's something that they want to include when they're talking. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah. I think that's really interesting topic. I think the when you make gestures related to games, so communication between game and player, or player and player, or player and researcher, or like player to like people who can, so this live streaming kind of thing. Those are all different types of communication, involved gestures, but they can be, those are all like interesting research topics, I think. Yeah, different research topics. Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And my sort of like mathematical play design principles and the different sort of zones of mathematical play that I've mapped out all involve to some extent the relationship between the player and the game. Because one of the things that's like, people will talk about, you know, that's a good game, that's a bad game. It's not an objective thing, it's very subjective. But at the end of the day, there are certain things that most games who do those things are almost objectively bad games. And those things include like erratic feedback. And so if you, so either not getting feedback regularly when you think you should, or getting feedback that's delayed in some fashion. And like every type of art game, you know, there's always an exception. So I hate to talk in like I'm not talking in, I don't promise that this is the case. But for example, with Rolly's Adventure and many console games, if you hit the X button, I'm like, it'll make your avatar jump. Now, if it was like, you know what, when you hit the X button, 1/3 of the time it'll make your avatar jump. And we're just going to put a random like number generator in there that decides whether or not when you press the X button, your avatar jumps. So if being able to precisely jump is a key part of the game, then that unpredictability will probably make your game a total piece of crap, like an almost objectively bad game. And so there's there is this strong relationship that I see that's like game and player that is actually quite similar to teacher and student. And it all has to do with what like Brousseau called this the didactical contract, which involves this huge amount of trust. When you start playing a game or when you start learning a new mathematical concept, it helps to have trust that the teacher or the game is reliable, is not asking you to do anything that you cannot do, and will provide feedback as needed that won't get you to the end without learning, but that if you are missing a crucial part of the game or the learning, that there is some part of the system there that will help you figure out how to get that part so that you can keep going. And it's just like, it really just comes down to trust. And it's either trust of a person, or it can be with games like trust of a design. Yeah, and I often avoid talking about games as being, I often avoid being like games this, teachers that, because I believe that they are fundamentally different things, and we will never have games that replace human teachers. I think that that is impossible, because from the radical constructivist perspective, we cannot ever predict everything that someone will learn. We're going to be surprised. You know, maybe in 100 years, we'll have advanced AI and robots will have citizenship in the vote. And then we might be able to say this technology can replace teachers, but that's because they are now human and can be teachers. I don't believe that before that point, we will ever be able to create a product that will replace teachers. But I think they can play similar roles in learning if that didactical contract is constructed and maintained throughout the learning experience. I just went on another spiel again. See, this is the problem with like talking about things I care about, is I'm just like, let me talk forever. But
Do you also see gestures as being able to provide feedback in the way that if they're trained through the game, that they can, kind of like a muscle memory, does this feel right in some way?
so I'm absolutely sure that it does. I can't say I have evidence of that for Rolly's Adventure. Yeah, but I know that like, well, for example, if you ask me what my computer password is and I'm not sitting at my computer with it locked down and the password box up, I'm unlikely to remember it. But as soon as you put it in front of me, I can type it right away. When I was a waitress back in the day, I would often remember what people ordered because I would remember where they pointed on the menu. So I wouldn't have to remember that they wanted a hamburger medium rare. I would just have to remember where they pointed. And so I think like, I absolutely think that there's a type of muscle memory habit, something that is automatically evoked as soon as the controller is in your hand. But I don't know. I haven't done any work on that. But I think that would be absolutely fascinating. Especially if you were able to look at some of the like hardcore esports experts and give them like a near transfer task and a far transfer task that use some of the same metrics, like clicks per minute or whatever, clicks per second probably, or whatever, just to see like what are some of the boundaries of that transfer. Yeah. I forgot to set a timer, didn't I? Yeah. It's been about 25 minutes, hasn't it? Oh, you set a timer, Nihal? Oh, you are so awesome. Okay, how much time do we have left?
It says 20 minutes when we start breakout room.
Okay.
5 more minutes.
Sweet. All right, more questions. Oh yeah, Paul.
Caro, one of the things I love about your work is the emphasis on the failure and feedback cycles within games and within play. And I'm thinking about what that has to inform broader embodiment design principles in general. So the idea that within the game, and I think as we've just kind of been discussing, within the game, players see the natural consequences of their actions, of their gestures, whether it's their own movement or it's the movement of their avatar within the game. And sometimes what happens in the game surprises them. And sometimes, I mean, there's that one scene where something just blows up suddenly and like you have all of the crazy responses of like, what just happened, right? And then, okay, and then approaching that again from the next, again. So I'm wondering about broader sort of embodied design principles around gesture and movement, and how we might design for such cycles of failure and feedback within maybe non-video game environments. Like what can we learn from video game environments that we can apply outside of that, in whether it's an in-person game or a collaborative icosahedron build or something where we can begin to see more natural feedback, more natural failure and feedback from our gestures. And so whether it's reflected back from a collaborative gesturer, or whether it's reflected back from the natural sort of capacity of the materials we're working with. Just wondering about how, rather than sort of the teacher saying, nope, that's not right, or that's the feedback that's given, where can we see that natural cycle of failure and feedback in other sort of embodied design environments or activity?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and there's 8 million layers to answer right there. But I'm going to say one of the reasons why I picked video games is because failure is an expected part of it. And it's an expected, often enjoyable part of it. People put a lot of time and energy into what failure looks like in their games because it's okay. It's not a bad thing. That doesn't mean it's not frustrating, but it's fundamentally different qualitatively for many people than like failing in a game, than having a teacher say, no, that's not right. And I think that a lot of that has to do with often, no, that's not right from a teacher, or really any like expert who is watching your work, is often paired with, this is how to do it, which violates this didactical contract, which games maintain, which is that the game will say you have failed, and it will give you a hint, but it will not tell you what to do next to get it right. You have to figure that out yourself, because the game has promised that you and the game together can successfully make it through. And so that contract often gets violated in more formal learning environments. One of the ways in which I've been expanding the mathematical play framework has been working with Nihal, my other student, Ekta Shokin, and then Amber Simpson, who's a faculty member at the University of Binghamton, SUNY. And we're looking at Amber's informal makerspace data to get a sense of how failure and feedback might manifest in that completely different environment. And we found some really like interesting things. Like, it was designed to be a collaborative activity. There's an iPad app that, thank you, Nihal, that controls a robot called Dash. But one of the things that we found is that in this space where there is no indicator of failure beyond what the group itself decides is failure, like the teacher in a makerspace, like gave this, it was a voluntary experience that took place within the physical construct of a school, and the facilitator was a teacher, but didn't really do much other than say, here is this goal for this phase of the activity. Now we're in the next phase. Here's the other goal, and here are the tools. That was pretty much the teacher's job. Well, so the teacher didn't say that's failure. Instead, the students themselves decided, like, they have this really big goal that was externally imposed by the teacher. And then they were like, you know what? We want to nuance that goal. So we're going to, as a group, decide that these are some other more detailed expectations that we're going to apply to our activity in this space. And then we are going to give each other failure and feedback indicators in this informal fashion, and then build upon those together. I'm gonna close all the rooms because I think, yeah, we're definitely out of time. So yeah, this is work that's in progress. Yeah, so it's complicated because it's one of those things where, like, putting down tape that later on a robot's going to traverse can mean, like, if the group wants this angle and somebody puts it down at this angle, then an indicator of failure is somebody else peeling up that piece of tape and then putting it back down. Or you put down a piece of tape and somebody else is like, we want that to be longer. An indicator of failure might not be peeling it up and replacing it with another piece of tape. It could be another person coming along and putting in another piece of tape that's at 180 to make it longer. So we're seeing these really interesting, like, emergent failure and feedback that I don't think are experienced as failure from the formal perspective, but are a little more from the game perspective. You just try something and it doesn't work. Sometimes that's all that failure is. Yeah.